Amazon, all interviews are based on leadership principles, but we do not explicitly tell which principles will be tested.
I want to dive into that a little bit later.
When I try to interview candidates, now when I hear some technical word and some technical problem, I would like to dive deep into it. And that small moments of diving deep with them, that's where I think it's become a trap for them.
Welcome back to episode 3 of Interview Kickstart's Getting Hired with Styers. Tonight, we talked a little bit about Tell Me About Yourself question, and we talked about some resume building, how to actually get seen from a couple of these different Faang companies. Then we talked about how to best prepare for these interviews, and how do you actually go from maybe a startup company into a large Faang company as well, and how do you actually make that impact? Today, we have a special guest with us. His name is Samit. He is a software engineering manager at Amazon. You mind going to introduce yourself a little bit for us?
Sure. I am Sumit Nigam. I have been in Amazon for last almost 10 years. I started my career around in 2002 and with a company called Tata Group. I was a software engineer there. Then from there, I moved to General Electric, and I was a senior engineer over there, working on their global expansion. In 2008, I joined Cisco, and I was working on the part of their global expansion as a senior engineer. And they transitioned over there to the management, manage their global expansion teams, and since 2015, I'm being at Amazon.
It sounds like one heck of a journey that you've had so far. I'm really excited about diving into that. Well, let me ask you this. I mean, you've been a software engineer for many years. What made you become a software engineer in the first place?
Hmm. That takes me back. So I think since I was 6 or 7 years old, uh, I I I had some fascination of solving puzzles and like mathematical problems. Uh, and as I grew, I think I start seeing, okay, there's instructions for everything, like you baking a cake or playing soccer. There's a steps has to be followed. And during my teenage, as I get exposed to computers, uh, I figured out there's a set of instructions which I can write, and then there is a computer will do that thing for me. I started to, it really made me feel like a wizard. That okay, I can do things like this. So that led me during my take computer science as my bachelor's and my master's degree, and then I have not looked back. It's like it makes me really excited to build the apps uh, or the software which millions of people use. I was from the start really excited about it to do all these things.
Now, you've been a software engineering manager for quite some time. I imagine you've done a lot of interviews. Now, when you ask that "Tell me about yourself" question, right? What kind of answer do you typically get?
So for me, when I ask, tell me about yourself, you're right. I know I have the candidate resume in front of me. I have read it before. My idea when I ask them about tell me about yourself is tell me why they are right fit for this role.
Okay.
Why they think is like one, I have read the resume, but I think I would like them to give me a brief introduction about that, why they think they fit for this role. What they have done so far in a concise manner. What is the scope of their role? Like, or will be how many people they have managed if they're coming for engineering manager. I think it just sets a platform for me to decide in my mind that which the role that I am interviewing for them is right for them. Maybe they should be interviewed for some higher level if they have. Let's say somebody comes with me, okay, I have managed almost like 100 people, okay, then I would be okay. I would say, okay, this is not a
Okay.
right role for you. Maybe we should interview for some different role, or
Okay.
otherwise. But I think that speech over there. It's more like a, for me, elevator speech.
Yeah,
Tell me,
that's a
tell
lot.
me
That's a lot to cover in just that. And so, in the way I look at the "Tell me about yourself" question, yeah, your expectations are a little bit higher than mine, right? So when I think about the "Tell me about yourself" question, for me, it's about it's just an icebreaker. It's just to get them comfortable in the interview, And so this way they understand what questions are coming up, right? So if you're telling me about yourself, you're not, if you're asking about like, or you're trying to gather like what makes them best for the role, it's not exactly telling too much about themselves. It really kind of comes through the interview. So if this is the first question I like to ask in an interview, like your introduction to me is exactly what I'm looking for, right? Because it's usually a softball question just to kind of get them eased into the interview a little bit. There's no wrong answer to it. But like you said, we have the resume in front of it. Like, don't bore me with your resume story. Tell me about your origin story. What got you excited about doing what you're doing in the first place? Like, what was that catalyst in your life? Right? Because I've got your resume for like, I want to know what is it that got you excited about being a software engineer? And then talk to me about your career path. How did you just glaze over it? And then at the end of it, you talk about what you just mentioned. So it's a combination of both of those. Like, why are you here? What has you interested in this company? Why did you choose this? Why are you interviewing with us? And I always put it in like in a three-parter: the past, present, and future. Right? Talk about the past piece of this. What it, like what got you into this? Like, what are you currently doing now? And why are you interested in this role? And the reason why I break it down in those three parts like that, because even as a recruiter, or even sometimes as a hiring manager interviewing, we one of the questions we always follow up with is like, well, what had you interested in this opportunity in the first place, or what do you know about the company, right? So you're getting ahead of that question by answering it in that "tell me about yourself" situation there. So I like the idea of combining those two philosophies of that to get kind of where they're looking for. And I kind of went sidetrack on it because you had the perfect introduction there. I'm like, oh my gosh, I have to talk about the "tell me about yourself" thing, because to me personally, that's what I want to hear. Because as a recruiter, like, I do interviews, I do 5, 6, 7 of these things a day. And the last thing I want to hear is someone tell me the exact same story I hear every single time when it comes to just walking through the resume. But everybody has their own, I guess, origin story, their own way of kind of actually getting into this. And that actually brings out that human element, that thing that makes you different from everybody else. And I think if we're able to bring some of that into the conversation, it would actually help with that. What are your thoughts on that?
I think you're right. That is so. This is the one of the tricky part of interviews, that the candidate has to articulate the responses, because everybody who is taking the interviews are different. The
Hmm.
So I think I absolutely agree with you. That's the icebreaker, because that's the introduction is which I think mostly during the interviews, if the candidate comes with the icebreaker, how they can provide that subtle information which is required for the interviewer to set up the stage, because from there on there will be more like a question answer round and the introduction which will set up. Like, I think I remember many of the interviews which I've taken, when there is a people gives us some introduction about themselves, you write something how what ignite them to be in the industry, in the profession, and then there's how subtle they articulate about what they are doing. That actually, while I'm taking the interview, it stayed in my mind, like what's a first impression that stayed in
Hmm.
the mind while I'm taking the interview. Though I can say it may be more like a bias, but yeah, we all are humans, so it stays in the mind.
It is. And so speaking of some of those biases there, I mean, one of the things that I like to teach about is something called mimicry. It's something called social contagion, right? So if someone is excited about talking about what they do, and this is why I like bringing up like talking about your origin story. I mean, when you were talking about it, like, I could feel your excitement and your passion for what you're doing. And I feel if we can get people to be excited about talking about the things that they do and why they do it, I think that comes off in a very positive light in that interview, and it sets the interview on a very high positive note versus coming in, it's humdrum. Well, I'm doing this right now in my interview, and I go down through your resume. It's like, nobody wants to hear that. We want to hear something exciting, something we haven't heard. And I think if we could bring that passion, that excitement to that interview, it sways that. I mean, I'm not sure if you've been in debriefs before like I have, but I've been in a couple of interview feedback sessions, debriefs, or whatever you want to call it, where it's like, well, they didn't, they're missing these things, this here and there, but their excitement about what they're doing and for our product, like, we've got to have this person on my team. Like, how often do you see that happen in like an Amazon debrief?
So Amazon debrief is I would say it's more of the data point focus. It
Okay.
is so we we assess candidates on the leadership principles, and if they're coming for the technical role on the functional competency. And for each of the questions that we are trying to assess the LPs, we would be it's more data point focused. What is the plus and the
Okay.
positive and negative points for how they demonstrate those LPs or not with their responses. And then the discussion is about all about LPs and their functional skills. I
Okay.
I think this so what I think this the passion which comes around, which is the initial responses come around. It's about when you're delivering responses, and
Hmm.
still that passion always transforms. Let's say if somebody is talking with some passion, he's showing that energy. It will transform into the responses
Yeah.
instead of some boring
Yeah.
responses where I will be okay, very straightforward, and that somebody comes with a lot of energy, with the passion, trying to provide the responses. That just transforms. So I think it is at that point when somebody is interviewing. If I am interviewing somewhere, or somebody candidate is giving the, I'm taking the interview. It's about how to frame my mind, and then I'm actually, it's about for me writing my own feedback. And I think yeah, I think that that passion is required. But and however, I think I it's with the Amazon interviews,
Yeah.
it's about giving peeling the onion. So I will
Okay.
keep on
Yeah, I
peeling
like
the
that.
onion, and I
I
keep
like
the
that.
peeling the onion, because the idea is one to know whether the what the person is telling, if they have actually have done it, uh, what is the impact of it, and how what they have done uh,
Okay.
for the example they are telling about, uh, and whether they have really done it. So
Oh yeah, that's just basic interviewing right there. It's like we keep peeling back those layers till we get to the root of it. It's like, okay, can you really do this, or is it just smoke? We'll find out. Like for anybody who's listening to this, and you're thinking that you can kind of come into an interview and like wing it, like maybe I don't have any experience doing AWS, but you know. I saw a video once. Let's see if I can make it happen. Well, we're gonna find out. That's how interviews typically happen. We get that one little flag that goes up. It's like, let me ask a follow up question, and then another follow up question, and then it just falls apart. That's typical interview right there for you. Like, so what are some of those things that that you're looking for in a type of profile when it comes to certain positions that you've worked on in the past?
so I think one thing which I will say for resumes are be specific. I think sometimes people have these general responsibilities which does not give any lot of data points to the if I'm reading the resume. So it's very important to be specific, provide the impact in the resume, provide the results. I will give you an example like somebody say, okay, I have improved system performance. That's not a response that I'm looking at resume. I'm looking for optimize system to reduce performance by 30%. Okay, now it
Yeah.
makes some difference to me. There should be this. They should have tangible results, data, metrics in the resume, which so that reading is also fun, and that gives that impression that what the person has done. So it gives the
Mhm.
context what they have done and what is the outcome of it and what is the scope of their role was.
Yeah, you make a great point. I mean, using percentage numbers is the way to go. And I talk to a lot of folks when it comes to like stay away from dollar amounts. I would rather see like a percentage number because that actually shows an actual like impact to the organization, right? So if you're talking about a $500,000 project that you implemented for a startup, that's a pretty big chunk of change. But for Bank of America, that's just a penny you found on a road
Yeah,
somewhere, right? So
you're right.
dollar amounts can have a hard time with that. And so now there are some times you're talking about being specific in being detailed in some of these accomplishments. Now, are you talking about the impact to like the percentage of like how it impacted the organization? Because where I find sometimes where someone's coming from maybe a different industry, like the baking industry, they've worked at Bank of America for the last 10 years and they're trying to get into Amazon, right? So, and one of the things I tell folks is like, try not to use banking jargon because again, recruiters, folks who are working in the SaaS side of that, they're not going to understand kind of what you're talking about. So when you're thinking about being specific and articulating some of the things you've done, you've got to be careful not to go too far down that rabbit hole of industry experience. So let's say someone's coming from like an insurance or banking industry. How can they make their resume stand out a little bit more, or even more, even better, coming from a startup trying to get into a FANG company? What are some of the things that they could do to help, I guess, stand out with some of the other applications that are out there?
I think that's an interesting question. I think this depends on the industry. Let's say if somebody is coming to some FANG company and maybe they're coming to like Amazon as pharmacy, uh, okay, they are coming from some pharmacy company. Okay, okay to give the pharmacy uh, jargons. Somebody in the pharmacy will understand about it. However, I think they're coming for some fungible roles. Let's say for software engineer, for engineering manager. I think over there they have to provide those technical terms which is understandable across the industry, like latency, redundancy, reliability, scalability, uh, how they optimize the performance, fault tolerance, operational improvements. That is in across the industry. Whoever is in the technical uh, domain will understand it. I think that's what I would frame it.
Mhm.
If somebody is coming from program project management, tell about how you do the Scrum, how you did the Agile, how you did the iterative project launches. So I think that's where that would be understandable. That what the people who are reviewing resume, the interviewer, the recruiters, that would be looking for. They're looking for those uh, keywords, terms, and clear articulation of the work. So you're right. I think if it's very industry specific, okay to write jargon. If I'm moving from Bank of America to Wells Fargo, okay.
Yeah. If you're saying the same industry, please, yeah, by all means. And this is where I tell folks like you need to have several resumes. And the way I look at resumes is like marketing material, right? You have to first understand who your audience is. I mean, that's just marketing 101. Like if you know who your audience is, you know how to market to them specifically. So if you're coming from the banking or insurance background, if you're targeting other banking and insurance, then jargon the heck out of it, right? Get that stuff in there because they're going to understand that. But when you're coming to Amazon, leave that out, right? You want to speak in more of like those terms that are transferable skills that you can articulate that is exactly what they're doing. And sometimes folks have a hard time doing that. And it's important to make sure that you look at it, you make sure that, hey, is this speaking to the audience? Is there anything in here that's going to throw me off or anything like that? Now, with it being as competitive as it is right now, what are some things that people can do to help stand out throughout, whether it's the resume review process or the interview process? What are some things that people can do to kind of help stand out in some of these?
I think there are a few things which I think seriously is. I think having a very clear and impactful resume would be helpful at this point of time,
Okay.
and specific to the the domain they are trying. Like earlier, it was like maybe 2 years back in 2022 or 2021 when there was a market was really hot. Uh, any general resume would be fine. But I think let's say at this point of time, it's there's a the bar is higher,
It
so they have
is.
to
Mhm.
they have to come with that impactful resume, and that has to be clearly providing what they know. Let's say if somebody is coming from the for a software engineer, they should be telling how they what they have done, what languages they have used,
Yeah.
how they build the scalable systems, how they think about designing systems, uh, how they have thought about how they improved operational excellence, uh, and they what are the project management uh, processes they have used, what are the methodologies they use for project management. I think the providing that information would be helpful because there would be that. And I think and you're right, there could be, they have to, many of the time they have to custom made their resume for some of the roles they're really interested. I know it is very hard to make
Yeah.
the custom made
Oh yeah.
tailored resume for each and every role. However, I think if they're really keen on some roles and some companies, they try to should make that actually tailor made for that role. That give them more, they give them better probability of being called for the interview. At least that will be gone through. The other thing which I think which is people should do at this point of time, and especially in this time, is many people actually I think applies on the company side, which is fine. It gets selected, but if they can find some referrals, I think it is helpful.
Referrals, my goodness. I cannot talk enough about referrals. My goodness. You're absolutely right, man. And it's funny. I tell folks all the time. It's like, listen, if you want to get seen, a lot of folks fall in what we call that black hole of resumes, right? Where there's so many people that apply to the jobs, and it's just like, we're not going to see all those resumes. This is when you apply to a position, you haven't heard anything back for 6 months because no one's ever seen you, right? And so what a lot of folks don't understand when it comes to our applicant tracking systems, when you're referred into a position through the applicant tracking system, not just saying, hey, could you send my resume to the hiring manager? No, 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 no. You need to be referred into the applicant tracking system because you go to a whole different area than that application pool. And we've got, especially in recruiting, we have SLAs and there's other teams that handle referrals. You get seen. Now, it doesn't always guarantee you an interview, but it does get you seen. And you're absolutely right. Like you got to work those referrals and use LinkedIn. Like that's what it was built for, to network with like-minded professionals and introduce yourself. Like everybody's heard the term, it's all about who you know. Well, let me ask you, what are you doing to get to know people? Right? You got to put that effort into it. I've always said this, like my grandfather used to tell me this, and I've always lived by it. It's like when effort and opportunity collide, create success. And we talked about like the different job markets, right? Right now is what we call a sluggish job market. And it might be daunting because you're applying to so many different positions. You're not getting anything back. Well, definition of insanity, keep doing the same thing over and over, expecting different results. We'll try something different, work those referrals. But you still have to kind of keep putting that effort into it, because if you're not doing that, when that opportunity pops, you have to be there for that. The way to look at it is like, it's law of averages. It's all about statistics. Everybody's like, well, you got to get lucky as well. Luck is all about statistics. It's about, you have to put that in. You've got to be there. You can't win the lottery unless you play, right? And so that's a big piece of that. And these are some things that you could do to kind of help give you that competitive advantage. And you've got to get seen for some of this stuff. No, thank you so much for that. I mean, it's fantastic. I mean, with COVID, and we didn't do anything for like 6, 8, like 9 months, something like that. And then when everything opened back up, everybody was like, oh, there's so many different jobs out here. I'm going to go do that while we're trying to do net new positions. It was the craziest hiring I've seen in 20 years. It was bananas. And we would hire anybody for anything, even if, and this was the perfect time to try something new too. So if you've been a software engineer, you want to be a product manager, come on over. Right? Or if you're a TPM and you're right there on the cusp of trying to be like a software engineer, we're going to see what you could do. Right? We were taking so many chances back then because we were hiring like crazy, but now nothing. We're not doing much from that because, again, we could be a lot more selective. We only have so many positions that we could hire, and we were going to look for that, right? So I appreciate you bringing that up. Now, what I want to dive into is just a little more about Amazon, right? So a lot of folks have been trying to get into Amazon, and we can even try to translate this to other FANG companies as well. But I want to talk about a little bit of Amazon's processes a little bit, right? And so what advice do you have for folks that are interviewing with Amazon that might be a little bit different from maybe some other FANG companies? Like, what would you say is what makes Amazon a little bit different from like Meta or Apple?
I think Amazon, I I think every company have their own some principles and values. Amazon is a bit tricky because Amazon does not explicitly, Amazon, all interviews are based on leadership principles, but we do not explicitly tell which principles will be tested.
Ooh, I want to dive into
So,
that a little bit later.
so and which is for because for every role and levels there will be a different principal who will be tested, uh, depending on which level the person is coming, which role they are coming. And the one thing which Amazon interview would be diving deep. I think
Okay.
there are many companies would be like there would be I I don't know what specifically how meta questions comes into place, but I think uh, every company has different. I think there is some companies which may ask hypothetical questions. In Amazon, it's more about the very example scenario based questions which we ask. So it's
Like
very
behavioral
specific
interview questions, right?
behavior interview questions, and we would like to know that what person has done previously, and so it's it. I have, and I think that would be same for across all the companies. When people come, they should prepare their response in the star format, and that's
Yeah.
where I see maybe just it's different than what you were asking me. But when many time people come and they provide the responses, I it's very hard to connect the dots because they
Hmm.
do not flow in the context in the proper format.
Yes. Thank you. Yes, my goodness, the star method. And yes, it's overdone. There's a lot of different methods out there, but every single one of those methods, it's all just a formula of telling a good story. That's all interviews are. Is just telling stories about things you've done in the past. Regardless if you're interviewing with Amazon, Meta, or things like that, they're all the same. It doesn't matter what company it is, but you're absolutely right. You have to be able to tell a good story that the listener can understand and follow along to make sure that we can properly evaluate your experience. And that's not easy to do. And that's why we like to using the actual star method itself. I mean, behavioral interviewing is not easy for a lot of folks out there. If you're not, a naturally boisterous person like myself, sometimes it takes practice to do this, right? And this is where preparation comes into play. And a lot of folks talk about, what's the best way to prepare for some of these interviews? And I would say, in my opinion, that's it right there, is being able to tell good stories about your past, like practice interview questions, right? Even just go and chat GPT. What are good behavioral interview questions for a software engineer at Amazon? Right? Start with that. Right? Start practicing some of those questions and telling good stories. Follow the star method. And it's a way of telling a story in a linear pattern that's going to hopefully address the actual question that you have. Now, let me ask you, since we're on the topic of behavioral interviewing, one of the questions that honestly, other than to tell me about yourself, one is like asking, tell me about a difficult technical challenge you face. Now, I'm not sure if you run into this often, but one of the things that I see quite often is folks that they overcomplicate that answer, right? Like, I want to hear something complicated, but I don't care so much about the technicality of what it is. I'm more curious about how did you actually figure it out? What steps did you take to solve that? How did you actually absorb that? What communication did you do to actually work through that problem itself and say, hey, is there going to be a delay? Did you have to learn something new? Did you have to bring in new talent to actually address what you're trying to do? Right. And I find folks that they focus so much on what is like I would say the situation and task than it is about the actions. And and I would say that's almost like people find themselves falling into that trap quite often. Do you see that often in the interviews that you do?
I I do, and so I think it depends on the which who is which role they are providing the response, and so let's say if I am getting a senior manager or somebody, I think then I would like to see this how what was the impact. Still, I want to see the technical challenge. What was the technical challenge, but in the broader terms, what the breadth of it, what was the impact of it, what they
Yes.
have done, how they communicated, and what is the outcome of it, and maybe what their
Exactly.
lesson they learned from it. There are times where I would be maybe, let's say, if there would be a frontline manager or a software engineer, I'm fine to go into that technical details. However, what I think is, see, I am that people who are interviewing are more from the most of them from a technical background from many years. Now, when I understand, I hear the some technical word and some technical problem, I would like to dive deep into it. It's my inner tendency.
It's almost a
and
trap for you. It's like, okay, I want to hear more about this story than how you actually solved it, because now I'm
and
curious.
I many times see people do not have, when they provide those, they don't have the follow-up responses for that. And I think that's where I think it's also become a trap for them during interviews. So if I
Hmm.
try to go into the technical systems, into dive deep, then I think it has to be really good understanding of it, because many of us are actually just wired to go deep into it. So I will, for sure, I will ask a follow-up question, because it's not about just I'm trying to see whether somebody has done it. It just makes me curious. Okay, how you have
Yeah.
done it? Now tell me about it. I would like to know. It's because I feel the interview is a learning experience for both the candidate and the interviewer, because many times I learn something new when I try to interview candidates, and that small moments of diving deep with them makes me learn something new.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, there's been several times I've been on interviews, especially if I'm interviewing maybe an HR journalist, like talking about employee relations issue. I'm like, I want to know more about that T. Tell me more about what happened. I'm curious now. I see what you're talking about. I may not be able to dive as deep in the technical stuff like that, but yeah, there's some things I'm more curious about too. So I could definitely see you kind of go in that direction. That's great. All right. I mean, so when you're thinking about like a software engineer coming to Amazon, we talked about the leadership principles. I mean, if y'all don't know about Amazon, like you've got to understand those leadership principles. Like you have to know this yourself. But what happens if we don't pick up on what specific principle that they're trying to uncover in that? How does that typically play out in an interview?
So the questions are designed in such a way, and when we'll ask, they those principles has to come out. They are very
Okay.
targeted those on those way. If not, then interviewer will steer the candidate to provide those responses. And the only thing which the I think those LPs will not be touch base if the candidate does not provide the response to the question correctly and try to answer something else. Like it happens sometimes when I ask
Ah.
some question, they provide some different response which is not related to the
Oh,
question.
drives me
So
bonkers. I'm like, okay, let's try this again. So this is what I'm asking. My goodness, yeah, it happens all the time. I'm not sure if it's like a recent thing, but I find that happen quite often. It's like, okay, let's circle back and let's try this again. Tell me when you've done this, right? So I could see that. Now, when it comes to some of these leadership principles, right? Could you give me like an example of like what like a behavioral interview question is and how they incorporate that in there? Like what does that sound like?
let's say this would like tell me about a time you took ownership of a challenging problem and saw it through completion. So I think there we are. It's about ownership, how you handle
Hmm.
responsibility, right? Uh, so it and deliver results, because you
Yeah.
own it, you took a responsibility of it, and you deliver it because it has to be completed. So you see that the question by itself is designed such a way that
It's
they have
pretty
to provide
easy.
all the LPs. Or if I say, let's say, give an example when you disagreed with a colleague and how you resolved it. It is about conflict resolution, collaboration, which is disagree and commit,
Mhm.
or on
Yeah.
trust. So they
Good.
the question.
I mean, just thinking off the top of my head, I mean, something that might help folks in an interview. I mean, now, did y'all still do? Is all your interviews still video, or do y'all do in person interviews again?
Right now we are doing all videos interview.
Oh, save so much money. My goodness. And we're able to hire faster. I am loving this video interview time. As a recruiter, it took us forever to hire. We were flying people in, getting them in it was a nightmare. So for as a recruiter, I love the whole video interviewing thing. But I mean, hear me out. Like, what about using your environment to kind of help you out? right? I mean, one of the things that I like to do, and this is me personally, because again, with my ADD brain, I am all over the place, and I have a hard time just like being able to pick what story that I need. And I need like visual cues sometimes. So what I do before an interview is I have sticky notes. You can use sticky notes, WordPad or whatnot, but I'll have like sticky notes kind of like all over the place with keyword association to stories that I know that I could tell in different variations of it, because now I didn't rehearse it as a script, but I've told these stories enough, just like a story you would tell at a party. You tell it enough, you could tell it in different variations and depending on who your audience is. But sometimes what you can do is that you could put these leadership principles like on a sheet of paper right there. So this way you can kind of remind yourself like, okay, yes, this is kind of what they're talking about. It might help like trigger something in your mind, because in interviews, like you've got your adrenaline pumping, you're nervous, like all of these things are playing against you. And this might be a way to actually help folks kind of, I guess, reacclimate themselves to what they're trying to think of. What do you think about using something like that?
So I I think that helps. I will tell you what I think, three things which people I feel that do wrong during interviews.
Please do. Yeah,
Uh,
that's what I want to hear.
One is, I think I have seen people, which we talked about before, not using the star format. And I
Mhm.
think that's just not connect the dots, which makes the story, things coming in a different place. The narration is not comes properly, and it requires a lot of follow-up questions. And I think it just uh, breaks that momentum. The second thing which I think is, which I see, is that people do not, it's not about Amazon or any company. Knowing the company values, principles, and tying your responses
Yeah.
to those principles and values is important, be it
Hmm.
Meta, Apple, Google, Amazon, or any other company. Uh, the third thing which I feel that I think this sticky notes is good, which is people at least have their something in their mind connected. The one thing which I see people do is that they over prepare, and that also is wrong. They memorize word by word.
Oh yeah, don't even get started on scripts. Yes, don't ever memorize a script. My goodness. I'm so happy you brought that, because I was like sitting on the edge of my seat, is like, please tell me scripts, please tell me scripts, because I don't know about you, but that will trigger me every single time, because there is a huge difference between verbal and written communication. And when you're writing down your script, it is chocked full of buzzwords, and I'm like, and you immediately know that this is a scripted answer. And so, Mike, you're absolutely right. And so, when we're talking about like preparing for these interviews, the way I like to describe, especially behavioral interviewing, is get good at telling stories. Everybody has stories, like when you go to like a party or a social gathering or something like that, a story that you tell over and over that's maybe engaging or something that has something. Everybody has those. But every time you tell those stories, they get better. And you're absolutely right, never ever 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 memorize a script, because I mean, for me, like that, right, like I will reject somebody almost like that's a grounds for rejection for me, because you lose, it's not genuine, right? Loses authenticity, because it's just you just read me a script that you put down. How do I know it's real when we start asking follow-up questions, starts poking holes into the whole thing? And if it's chock full of buzzwords, like my ADD brain, like I'm just gonna filter it out. I'm gonna get distracted, right? You got to come with the meat and potatoes that I'm looking for. So first of all, when it comes to Amazon, like talk to us about like what does the interview process look like there for like a software engineer and a manager? Like I want to kind of get an idea of like what it's like for each one of those. Now for Meta, just so I can kind of add a little something there too for another Faang company. So when I was at Meta, I was specifically hiring for iOS engineers, right? And each level had different types of interviews. Mostly it was the same core type of interviews. We had two coding, as a behavioral interview, and like a system design one, right? But the more you go up in a level, we would add maybe an additional system design one or an additional behavioral one, depending on if it's the manager route. And so that's how we typically broke it down. With there. Now, how does that typically work like at Amazon right now?
So there will be. It depends on the software engineer and the manager, I think, and depending on software engineer also level, as you mentioned in Meta. Like they will be different for interns, they will be different for the student hires. But let's say somebody from industry hire, which we are talking about. So there will be three coding rounds, which will be mostly, I think, problem solving, maintainable code, and DS and algos. And then there will be two behavioral interviews. And then they would have initial before there will be phone screens, which will be can be one or two depending on, uh, and also which we also have this online code assessment where they have to before they actually go for phone screen they have to do the online code assessment and write the code on the system, and then we review that the code they have written is qualifies to be taken for the further interviews.
Mhm.
Uh, I believe it would be same for other companies also. I think the software engineer interviews are consistent among most of the Fang or Mang companies, I believe so. Uh,
Yeah, a lot of them are. A lot of the fake companies can be pretty similar. Now, like when it comes to like hiring there, right? I mean, like when I was at Meta. Now, this is again several years ago, and I imagine that process has changed a little bit. But when you were hired at Meta, you didn't know who your hiring manager was until after you go through like this really long boot camp, and then they would come in and say, "Okay, these are the teams that are hiring," and then you would go with that. For a lot of the positions, there were some where you would know if this is the actual hiring team you're going to, especially for Oculus, that was a completely separate group over there. But we could like your iOS engineer can go anything from Instagram to Facebook, to all those different variations of it. What was it like at Amazon? Like when you interview, did you ever get to meet your actual manager that you're going to be working with, or did that come later?
so yeah, I think that's a good question, which is so I know in Meta there's a team matching, which happens later in the stage. Uh, in Amazon, it could be multiple ways. It could be based on the pool rack, which is for pooling we hire, and the managers try to get the candidate, and candidate have a choice to choose the team. That was a very that was a scenario when in 2 years back, uh, when there was the job market was crazy.
Oh yeah.
Now, so right now, I think since there are less openings, so
Hmm.
it's very depending on the rack is open, and then the person would be hired. And many time now these days they will be having the hiring manager would be there, and they will be very specific to a role. However, some it depends on the organization by organization. Some orgs will still have this more like a pooling interviews, and then they would be having the managers who have the open positions select the candidates which they want to take in their teams, and the candidate would have a choice which manager they would like to or team they would like to join. uh, I think it's a combination of all three. Would be could be a pooling racks, could be very directly for a specific for a role,
Okay.
and or there could be very specific to a org and they will be hiring for it. uh, which is a different, but I think it's not a one size fits all in Amazon, which I have seen.
Okay. Now let me ask you this: how do you get up leveled at Amazon?
That's a good question. I think if we are hiring for a role, we are hiring for the specific level. But however, I think if the candidate is, if it figured out the candidate is should be hired is actually the job level is very is low for the candidate. Like they have done, like I was telling you, somebody's have actually managing almost like 100 plus people, and I'm hiring them for a frontline manager may not be the right thing. Uh, so that's sort of where I was telling you in the introduction, I get to know, or during the responses, they get to know what the scope of the role they are managing. Then the idea would be that they would not be hired for the role which they are interviewing for. And what normally is the interviewer or the recruiter, which we do is that we recommend them for a different role which matches to their current scope. And it happens that many times people who come for the, let's say, frontline manager, they are they are then referred to as a senior manager. Somebody comes as senior manager, referred to them a director, depending on the
Okay.
scope of the role they are managing. It also happens that down leveling also happens.
Yeah, that happens a little more often. Now, speaking of like down leveling, right? So, like, what would you say would be like when you have a candidate in front of you, like what how would you consider down leveling a candidate?
So there is a role guidelines for each level, and when we interview candidate, we are trying to see how they're meeting that role level guideline. And I think the idea is when we're interviewing them, we are interviewing them for that specific level. However, during debrief, the discussions happens that whether candidate is good for that level, or should we, if we think that this candidate is not the good for that level which this we were hiring for, then are they good for, are they should we hire them for the down level them and then hire them. So that's the one, the common discussion which we have towards the second half of debrief. If if everybody agrees, hire. If nobody agrees, that second question have down level. Sometime I think down level does not work for some candidates because they already have such a good experience.
Compensation. Yeah, compensation usually
Compensation.
plays a lot into that.
Normally, actually, we as a interviewer do not know about the compensation of the candidate. That's something which is recruiter knows.
Yeah,
And then I think
that's the reason we usually direct it. I'm like, well, we could down level it, but but yeah, no, that's simply where recruiting steps in and kind of helps drive that
and I think
conversation.
now in this, especially in the Washington state and many states, recruiters cannot, we cannot ask for the compensation what they have currently right now. Uh,
Correct. Yes.
so I think many time which I have seen the discussion to down level or do not hire is specifically on the skill set, and the way which sometimes down leveling for somebody does not make sense, though they are good fit for down level, but the amount of experience they have, it feels like they will be, if they down level, they would not be a right thing for them. Instead,
Yeah.
let them attempt next time. After some few months, they prepare more, and they can come back and give the another interview.
Now, what is the current cooldown period if you don't pass the interview right now?
It depends. I think which is the interview it could be, and it's very depend on the bar is, and the recruiters are the
I guess so. Yeah. I
dominant
mean,
party into it.
at Meta, like when I was there. Now, I think it's changed since I was there. Like back in the day, it was a solid 1 year.
Yeah.
But you're right. Depending on how well they did in the interview or how close they missed it, I might be able to. I could use a use case to actually interview them like within 6 months of it. Right. There has been a couple instances where you can get approval for that, but most of the time they have something pretty set in stone there, and I think this changes quite often. Now, let me ask you this. So how does someone come from like a startup world or a smaller company past that interview?
So I do not see that's a big blocker for ICs. I think IC has the amount of experience and the amount of impact they have made and the work they have done. However, I think for managers, it matters. Uh,
Yeah.
the scope, amount of people, the uh, impact, and the breadth they need on the in the FANG companies uh, is exponentially higher than the startups. And so I think that's where it is. Depending on what they are doing in the startup, they may have to start from the, let's say if they have to start at the lower level in the FANG companies,
An
which happens.
M1. Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
which happens.
Yeah.
Many of the yeah.
And it's one thing you're talking about because when we think about like like job titles mean absolutely nothing, right? So I mean, again, it's the scope of the actual work that you're doing. Like a senior manager at Amazon, you're going to have managers under that and ICs. Where maybe a senior manager at like a startup, you only have like 3 people reporting into you, right? So it's about the actual scope of work that you're doing, and sometimes again, don't focus so much on the job title itself. Focus on the actual functions of the positions, right? Pay attention to those pieces and how you can make an impact to that because you might be shooting a little too high because you're focusing on a title, not the actual function, the actual responsibilities of the role and the compensation. Like that's going to be a big difference there, So it's quite of a change there.
Yeah, I've seen many. I think I've known people, seen people. I think they try to do one-to-one mapping, uh, and that does not work with the one-to-one mapping, which is uh, and I think that also sometime constrained them getting the role in the FANG companies because they try to get the same title what they have in the some smaller size company, but the scope of the role is way bigger in the FANG companies.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And even when it comes to like management itself, I mean, you have to like when I was hiring managers at Indeed, Indeed had a very structured when it comes to managers, right? Like the actual things you have to do when it comes to performance evaluations, how you actually move folks through the process. Like there are so many different things that you have to keep in mind. Whereas like startups, again, Wild West, like they don't do as much management. It's not as structured as some of that. So when you're coming into some of these large FANG companies where they are very structured in the processes that they have, you have to make sure that you keep that in the back of your mind and being able to say, although that I wasn't it wasn't as structured as this is what I can do and I understand what this is about. So do you see sometimes that there is that disconnect between a very structured environment and one that's kind of more of the Wild West?
So I think that startups have that culture, which is they have to be a wild west. They cannot build those many processes and SOPs like the big companies would have, because the idea is to deliver product faster, move fast. It's more about uh, getting things ready for market fast. And I think everybody should be ready to do everything. So many of the
Yeah.
startups would be having the CEO doing more, coming up to the floor doing things, and CTO doing the coding and all those stuff.
Oh
But
yeah. I've worked at a lot
uh,
of those startups.
and so I think it's a different learning. It's a different culture, which is, I think it's interesting. And I know many people who get that excitement, and that they get so much energy from it when they can do anything, and there is no, it's more about moving fast, and there is no
Yeah.
bureaucracy, following processes, making somebody agree to you. You can make things happen. uh, However, I think is in the big companies, there is a thousands of people. There's a the they require the process to be built because everybody is building their things by themselves, and
Yeah.
everything has to be, the puzzle pieces has to be fit together, and so the blocks has to be fit together, so they have to, and everybody have there is an organization map, there is a processes has to be followed, so there it organically there would be more layers, more decision makers, more people would be working, and there will be hierarchy. So getting those things moved is a different skill by itself.
Yeah.
Making those relationship, those collaboration, uh, moving forward with your project plans, building those visions for your team, uh, it's all different. So I think that's a different learning. Like, I think you're right. Anybody who is going from Fang to a startup, it's uh, it's a learning
It's
curve for them.
different.
And the same way, anybody coming from startup to some Fang or big company is a learning curve for them, because they have to learn to function a new way.
hmm So how do you when it comes to an interview? I mean, I know especially as a recruiter, this is something that I do talk to them about, like setting expectations of like this is what it all looks like and things like that. So in your interviews when you're interviewing a manager, how can somebody from a smaller company or a different industry like portray that even though I haven't done something in that what you, like you mentioned with all the bureaucracy and things like that and all the SOPs and processes, how do you convey that saying although I haven't done this, like I haven't worked in this type of environment, but I can? How do you convey that in a way that the team feels confident enough that okay, this isn't the same environment I've worked in the past and I can't show examples of this, but how can I show you that I can?
Uh, to be honest, it's hard.
It is.
Uh, so because uh, during interview, we want to collect those data points
Yeah.
that somebody has done that before, because we are hiring for a role which is to, on the base of the previous experience somebody has done. Now, can they do it? Maybe, but
It's a
uh,
risk. It's a risk
it,
there.
it it's a risk, and we are assessing that somebody has done it before. Because if somebody can do it, then it maybe we have to start, like, there is a that's where we hire the people at the level in the ladder is like they're hiring
Yeah.
at the, and then they slowly grow, and then they, because they are learning in the organization, uh,
Yeah.
how
It's
they
tough.
can do
I
those
talk to a
things.
lot of managers that try to make that transition from a FANG company, from a startup to a FANG company. I'm like, listen, it's not going to be easy. Now, this is something that I like to teach about. Like, and I want to get your opinion on this, right? So, when it comes to, behavioral interviews, right? We're talking about stories about your past, right? And a lot of times, especially if you're coming from that different type of industry, you may not have a specific example with that. What would you say if a candidate were to tell you is like, honestly, what I would do, right? So instead of telling you a story about something they've done in the past and kind of flipping the script to more of like a process answer and really answering the question at the action phase of the STAR method and saying, like, okay, even though I haven't done this specifically, but this is how I would go about doing this. This is how I would see this. Would that give you any indication of like, or at least a little more confidence saying, like, okay, I still might be taking a risk on this person because they haven't been into that, but they're collective knowledge of things that they've done in the past and their ability to see what we're doing could give me just that little bit extra boost to saying, okay, this might be something that we would consider.
That's actually that's interesting, and I have not I've taken lots of interviews. Uh, I never got this kind of response from the candidates. However, I think if I get this kind of response, it gives a confidence. Like I think I can still, the idea about doing interviews is to see that how in a situation person behaves, how they, what actions they take, how they act on it, uh, and how they can how they can achieve an outcome, right? A result.
Yeah.
And if they can demonstrate, okay, I have not done it, but if I would be in this situation, this is the XYZ or ABC steps I will do it. I think that will be a good discussion during debrief.
I
I can
like it. And that's why you join the interview Kickstart Getting Hired with Stars right there. You pick up on these little things, and that's one of the things I love doing is like flipping the script because honestly, like we can't expect everybody to live through every example that we may have come into, and there's going to be a lot of times when you're interviewing, and again, all behavioral interviews are just stories about your past, and there are times where you don't have examples like that, right? And so in the way I like to do this is be honest. Like honestly, I haven't done this before. However, this is what I would do. And this is where some of that preparation comes from because you're interviewing for Amazon. You haven't worked for a FANG company before. And so you're going to have to put yourself in that position. I'm like, okay. And this might even actually be good to even add to the end of your behavioral interview questions, right? So like, for an example, it's like, well, this is what I did at this company, right? And you walk them through the STAR method and things like this. And then a follow-up, we always talk about like, hindsight being 2020. This is what I would have done differently now that I think about it. But something to add to the end of this, now considering, coming to Amazon and understanding the scope of the work I would be doing, I probably would do this differently, knowing what I know now and what I'm going to be doing there. This will add that little extras. Like you've seen them do this in the past, but they do have that foresight to say, hey, I know where I'm going, and I know this is what I need to do in this kind of position to demonstrate those skills.
I agree. I think one, I agree that honesty is the best policy there during
Yeah. Oh yeah.
interviews. I have if if somebody have not done something, better to say I have not done it, but this is how I will do it. That gives
Exactly.
that confidence that okay, the person is confident about it, and that honesty gives a boost into the confidence by itself.
Yeah.
And then for the interviewer also, it's I agree with you that okay, I have not done it, but, and the other thing is, once somebody gives me this response that okay, I have not done it, but this is how I will do it. I many times I also give the opportunity for them to ask some different question, which
Okay.
I believe they would have done it. So let's say if somebody did not have a data points, but they would have, I either way do it if somebody doesn't have a data point for some question I ask. I always ask them a backup question. So maybe they have a response for that. If somebody give me this response, I have this one data point that how they would have done it. Now I will have a second question which might they have a response about it, and I have additional data points.
Good, good. I wouldn't mind interviewing with you. A lot of folks don't give him those opportunities, so I like that. My goodness, I think if anybody's going to take anything away, I hope that's one thing they take away is some of those behavioral interview techniques and flipping that script. Because especially in a very competitive job market like this, you got to do what you can to stand out of some of that stuff. And it's rough out there for everybody, but you just remember, you got to keep going at it. You got to keep trying. Don't ever read a script. My goodness, if anybody, again, take that away. Don't ever read me a script. Awesome. Well, Samit, I really do appreciate your time tonight. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you, and I look forward to work with you later on.
Thank you, Chris. Same here. It was nice talking to you.